Good evening, everyone. It is September 12, 2012. I am Rene Ritchie. Tonight we are talking everything iPhone 5 and Apple's special event. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is David Barnard of Cubby. David, how are you, sir?
Good. It's been a long day. Kind of tired.
Oh, it's been a fun day, though. I mean, I jokingly said this the other day. There's like the CNN and the Oscars of technology or popular consumer electronics all rolled into one, but it feels like that.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, for us Apple nerds, I think there's a lot of crackberry addicts that would disagree. But yeah, for those of us who make our living, following or developing on Apple's platforms, their announcement days are a big deal.
Yeah, well, it absolutely is that, and we're definitely the most fascinated. But like, I have my mom calling me, I have my dad calling. They don't call me when there's a Galaxy S3 event. They don't call me when there's news about RIM or about Windows. No one said a thing to me when the Nokia event happened. But I was always like, what's the new iPhone going to be like? Do you know when the new iPhone is coming? What did Apple announce today? There's like such a mainstream aware, and people want you to talk about it on TV. I mean, this doesn't happen a lot with a lot of products.
Yeah, I mean, Apple, partly through their secrecy and then partly just through their success, has built an incredible amount of hype around anything they do or say. I mean, it's almost a joke now that, Tim Cook walking into any company in the world is news, or like, Johnny Ive being spotted somewhere is news. I mean, it's almost like there's this like celebrity paparazzi kind of thing going on with Apple people, because everybody just wants to know what's next and what's happening, and they're kind of the celebrities of the tech world.
Scott Forstall and 50 Cent, yo.
Yeah. That was a great picture.
So, I mean, let's get into it. So Apple held the event. They announced it, of course, a week beforehand. We knew about it for a little bit longer than that. But Tim Cook came out. He talked about Apple. He talked about Macs. He talked about App Store. I think no big surprise there, right? He's been doing that for a long time now.
Yeah, and every time he takes a stage, we're all kind of like, wow, those are some big numbers. And even things, and he was able to kind of slight other tablets and stuff.
Yes.
But it's surprising. And we knew most of it, but for him to get up on stage and be able to tout as a company that their product sees what was it, 91% of all web traffic for tablets. I mean, he gets to go up on stage for the first 10 minutes every time and do this little victory dance. And that hasn't always been the case.
Oh, no.
But it certainly has been a pattern over the last, 5 years or so.
Yeah. And what's particularly amazing is, given that, like, people keep saying that too, this is a new business. This is a 5-year business. It's already bigger than Microsoft, just the iPhone part of it. And it doesn't look like it's slowing down.
Yeah, every time they come out with something new, I think, gosh, how many can they really sell? But that anecdote about, them setting a goal, I guess it was in the Samsung trial, so maybe it wasn't just anecdote, but, them, whether they jokingly or really were forecasting that each new iPhone would double the sales of the previous one. I mean, those are some crazy numbers. I mean, Apple is just, as a company, kind of in uncharted territory. They don't have a monopoly. If you go back to the early 1900s, you had Standard Oil and companies like that did incredible business but had monopolies. But here Apple is in fierce competition with other, manufacturers, with, depending on how you count, like 5 different, mobile OS platforms, and 10 or 20 different, major manufacturers. So, it's incredibly fierce competition, but Apple's in really uncharted waters in the level of success that they're having financially, not necessarily market share. They don't have a monopoly. People are selling plenty of other devices, but boy, can Apple put some money in the bank.
Well, that's just it. I mean, their profit share is ginormous compared to their market share. And I think you nailed it when you said that, because the only other people who are as profitable as Apple have oligopoly control over limited fossil fuel resources.
Right.
And that's astounding. So, Tim Cook is talking about Macs here, and that they're definitely benefiting from the halo effect. They are 6 years outpacing the PC industry. And the iPad, again, this wasn't an iPad event. We thought it might be, but it turns out that's going to be in October. But still, the numbers that Apple is doing, if you look at the iPad and computing in general, are way better than they were just 10 little years ago.
Yeah. So, and I was actually sitting with I had a great time, and I should thank them for being there. But we had a little lunch gathering. Public nerdery, public display of nerdery. We all had our iPads and computers out at a pub here in town. It was Matt and Reese and Isaiah. Oh gosh, I don't know his last name. He probably won't watch this anyways. But and Justin Ewens, who I work with, and another guy who showed up. And so we were all sitting around the table during the event, and Isaiah does Mac software, and he does plugins for RapidWeaver, and he said, business is just booming. RapidWeaver's doing incredibly well. His business is doing incredibly well. We talk all about iOS has just exploded beyond measure, but like you're saying, I mean, Mac is incredibly strong. Like, if none of this would have happened with iOS, and yet the Mac were this strong today, we'd all be jumping up and down and singing.
Yes.
Those of us who have been, Apple fanboys for, a decade now, we'd all be jumping up and down, excited about, whatever was coming for the Mac, because it's incredibly successful. I don't, has anybody broken down those numbers yet? Kind of like growth without the iPad and iOS stuff, because
I'm sure it's on asimco.com. So well. We just got to scroll.
Yeah, exactly.
So the main event, what we expected, the iPhone 5. Did you think they would go with that name, David? Or were you surprised that they stayed old school on that?
I am at a point, 5 years into my iPhone ownership and 4 years into owning a iOS development company, that I am not surprised by anything Apple does.
Does or doesn't do.
I think I'd be more surprised if I wasn't surprised. So, I thought they might do the new iPhone thing. But, now seeing that didn't even really make that much sense, given the iPhone 4 at free, the iPhone 4S at $99. So you almost have to name it the 5 just from a pricing strategy and, consumer perspective. So
I'm going to put it up. This is, sorry, go ahead.
Well, and so the iPad is kind of, running into similar waters where, if they come out with the iPad mini, there's at least a distinction between the iPad and the iPad mini. But you have the iPad 2, and the iPad mini. So, yeah.
It's not elegant.
It's not as elegant as one would hope Apple could be, but gosh, am I thankful it's not like iPad Rage Max HD 4.
Yes. Or N79362-4X. Whatever the new LG phone. Here's the startling thing to me. People immediately knocked it. It looks like an iPhone 4S. It looks like an iPhone 4. I'm working on an editorial right now called Inevitable, where if you look at Jonathan Ive and you understand him as a designer, this was the iPhone you were going to get. Since 2005, he's working towards making that purple iPhone. But the thinness and the lightness here, I think, is a huge story. And they talked about this with the iPad 2, and it's apparently a theme with the iPad mini. But this thing is tiny, 18% thinner, 20% lighter, David, in an already tiny phone.
Yeah. Again, I'm not surprised anymore at Apple at their ability to iterate. I'm sure a ton of pundits right now have or will be writing their big, hub about how Apple, fell short and how we knew everything coming into it, and that because Apple didn't surprise us, with some amazing new, rabbit out of the hat kind of thing, that Apple has somehow, fallen down on the job. They're no longer innovating.
They do that every year. It's a cut and paste article.
I know, but and this year it's a year. It's been a year since Steve has passed, and so and man, if I will rage at the blog post that drag his name into all of this. But anyways.
Well, no, I mean, that happened this morning, right? That was the artist formerly known as Fake Steve Jobs, saying that Steve Jobs was screaming from the heavens about this.
I didn't even read that.
You're better off.
Anybody who follows a company knows, and Dan Lyons should know that Steve was involved in the decisions that led to this.
Yep.
So, with Apple, and we talk about this every time, with the iPad 3 announcement, Apple is an iterative company. They are continually building upon a very strong foundation, and they sometimes are able to take big leaps in certain areas. Like I feel like the camera from the 4 to the 4S was a big leap. The camera from the 4S to the 5 is more of a small step forward.
Well, let me ask you this.
Yet to be seen. But
there's two kinds of innovation that Apple does. It's almost like TikTok. They do what we can see and then what we can't see. So last year, the innovation was the camera. This year, they're getting that sensor into an 18% smaller package, which doesn't sound trivial to me.
Well, and that's the thing, though. I mean, everything's a compromise. And personally, and I was talking about this on Twitter a little bit today, that personally, I've realized over the last 6 months that I pretty much don't take my DSLR out anymore at all.
Yeah.
Which means that for my kids, my son is now almost 4. So like most of the pictures of his first year of life really sucked.
Yeah.
And then they got better with the iPhone 4.
As the iPhone got better, your pictures got better.
Yeah, and then they got better with the iPhone 4S. But this year, I've started to get a lot more critical of it, just thinking, he's almost 4 and we're actually sleeping a little better now. So, I'm thinking a little more clearly and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't have great pictures of my kids. I have all these iPhone 4S shots. So, for me, part of me wishes they could have, made it a little thicker than it is and maybe taken another leap forward. And, the Nokia.
Yes.
How do you say it even?
Nokia. Yeah, Nokia.
Nokia. Their PureView stuff looks pretty amazing. And, this may be the first holiday season we move into where, at least from a hardware perspective, a competitor has the upper hand. And, you can aesthetically as well. I mean, I'm not saying it's better, but it's not an ugly phone. Looks like Homer Simpson's car. Right. So it's kind of an interesting time for Apple that some of their compromises, and sure, I'm sure they worked incredibly hard to build such a great camera and such a thin phone, but the competitive landscape is changing, and so it is going to be hard moving forward to keep some of the same priorities that they've had over the last 5 years. The nice thing is the way they do continue to iterate and the solid foundation they have, it doesn't matter how great the PureView camera is. If Microsoft can't deliver a solid, fluid Windows Phone 8 experience, or if the camera software sucks, or any number of things. And like you were saying, there's a lot that we can't see. And, they talked on stage about another image processing unit built onto the chip. Well, that deep level of integration allows them to do things that competitors can't. So, and even through software, they can upgrade things and, optimize performance, So we may continue to see improvements, and we haven't even seen the head-to-head shots. It's just an interesting time that a competitor might have a leg up on such an important aspect of the device. But again, rubber won't meet the road till who knows when, because the Nokia device isn't shipping, doesn't have a price, doesn't have, so we'll see.
So let me move us along then, and it's something that affects you more personally in terms of your livelihood and your career as a developer, and that is this display, because it is the first time Apple has actually changed the dimensions of the display. Yes, they went to Retina before, they pixel doubled it, and you had to make all new assets, and it was a pain in the ass, but this time they've actually added pixels to the display.
Yeah, so it's pretty obvious. Well, it was with where there's smoke, there's fire. And the closer we got to the event, it seemed more and more likely that, we would get this 16:9 screen. But I've kind of taken a little bit of a slow approach to my reaction as a developer.
Okay.
Because I don't think. Well, I was talking with Matt Panzarino earlier, and what I told him was I don't like shipping software for a device I haven't touched.
Yeah.
And that's just really what it boils down to, is that, I can look at the screen, I can look at pictures of the device, and I can, mock it up, and I can, create templates and play with UI, and I can, do all those things. But until I get a 16:9 iPhone in my hand, I'm not going to understand what that really feels like. And, the truth is, it may be an incredibly minor change.
Yeah.
Because the iPhone is thinner, I imagine you're going to hold it slightly different, or at least kind of have more finger reach. And then, the screen didn't just get bigger, it also shifted down towards a home button. It kind of expanded from the center.
Yeah.
And so, the thing we've been most worried about is reaching that top nav bar area. But depending on how the thinness of the device comes into play and the change in position, I'm just not even sure yet, like, what real impact it will or won't have on usability of the device. And, part of me wants to trust Apple and say, oh, they wouldn't have done it unless it was awesome. But, Apple has its own agenda, and, they're not immune from making mistakes.
And definitions of awesome vary.
Exactly. and then the other thing is you have varying levels of compromise. So, the thing I love about the concept, and again, I haven't had it in my hand. I don't know how this will play out, but what I love about the concept is that it frees up vertical space for Chrome. So, there's been such a brouhaha, against buttons and, UI Chrome and skeuomorphism, like all these things,
You made your timer app to prove a point.
No, I didn't. But beyond that, I think that UI Chrome and buttons in particular have gotten a bad rap.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're just incredibly usable on a multi-touch touchscreen device. And when I can reach out and hit that clearly labeled edit button that looks like a button that is self-evident,
It's discoverable.
It's discoverable. I mean, it's just such a foundation of the amazing usability. And I really want to at some point, and maybe I'll get the new Lumina phone, but I'd like to spend a month or two with Windows Phone 7. But the thing in short-term use of it that always kind of weirds me out is that nothing looks tappable.
Yeah.
Nothing looks like a button. So you never quite know what to tap or what not to tap or what, and it's disorienting at first, and I'm not sure if I could get used to that. But anyway, so
are you happy about the letterboxing/pillar boxing approach for apps that haven't been updated yet?
It makes sense, and the good thing is, I mean, like for most of my apps, it's probably not going to be a huge deal to just stretch them. But what I was getting to before is that now you can have that more. You can have that full view of content and still have the Chrome.
Yes.
And still have more content than you would have had even if you had no Chrome. So think of an app like Clear. They got rid of the Chrome to, create this amazing new, everything is the content and there's nothing in the way. Well, now you can have more content and still have a whole row of buttons if you wanted it. So, and for Clear, it's going to be nice because you have more space on the screen to see more of your task list and stuff like that. But the bottom line being, the keyboard will get out of the way more, the top nav bar.
But what about landscape mode, Dave? Because in Safari, you go full screen now, and they didn't actually show us the landscape keyboard but theoretically, you're going to have really long UI elements in landscape mode if they don't get out of your way.
You know, it's funny. I don't use my iPhone. I don't use my iPhone much in landscape. I'll watch videos in landscape. I'll look at charts in landscape.
Some games.
But I don't use my iPhone in landscape much, and so it's not something I think about a lot. And I know a lot of people like to type in landscape, and I've gotten some complaints about some of my apps that don't support landscape typing. And it's something I go back and forth on whether it's worth the effort to accommodate, or whether, so many of Apple apps, just barely got landscape mode. And it almost seems like grudgingly so,
Oh, fine. You want your bumper?
So yeah, landscape's going to be funky, But, I have been thinking that 16:9 does make a lot of sense in the coming years as, all these rumors swirling about TV and like more kind of big screen plays. And, I've written a lot about AirPlay and think it's just an incredible technology. And really, I'm really excited about ways that the big screen can be integrated into the small screen experience. And so, it's really nice that now you develop an app and like an app like Gas Cubby, you're going to tilt it sideways to see charts. Yeah. So once you've built that 16:9 view, you can throw that same view up through AirPlay. So in some ways, it's going to kind of even grease the wheels a little bit more for AirPlay content views and for, not having to do double work creating that sort of thing.
Yeah, it almost feels like vertical is productivity and landscape is consumption, entertainment, like content creation sort of mode. It's almost a binary state for me now.
Yeah, well, and for me, I wouldn't even say content creation.
Well, like the DJ apps and the video mixing apps and, like iPhoto, iMovie, GarageBand.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, see, I don't even use those.
All right, so the other big announcement, this is something that we also heard rumored for a long time, LTE. It came to the iPad in March. We kept hearing that Apple was working everything they could to make sure that it was not just LTE, but really good LTE. And I think they did a very good job here. It's a single chip LTE. It will work in more countries around the world than the iPad does. I'll put up a little bit of them showing it off, but it looks to me like and the battery life looks great. I mean, it's even better than the iPhone 4S battery life.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, it's hard for other people to pull off that kind of stuff. During the Amazon announcement, they said something about, we built our own, was it a 4G chip? Or they built their own something.
They're using
chip.
MIMO, which is Jeff Bezos' favorite word in the presentation. MIMO. It's also in the Nokia phone. It's basically they're using I think dual antennas and they're using multiplexing. It's
right, but there's something else where Amazon said we developed our own chip specifically because it's better, and we're doing something.
Dual antennas, dual Wi-Fi.
Is that the?
Yeah. So,
anyways, whatever it was, as somebody who follows this industry, to hear that Amazon was building their own chip, I was like, oh god, this is like an antenna gate or.
Well, we joked about that. They're not known as either a hardware or software company.
No, they're just not. But when Apple says, we deeply integrated 4G in a way that no other company can, that's what Apple does. And they've had flubs here and there. I mean, the antenna gate, for all the hemming and hawing and back and forth, I mean, that was an issue. There was an issue with the antenna, and other devices had and everything, whatever. But, there was some issues. So Apple isn't perfect, but, when Apple says we did something incredible with a chip, they probably did something pretty incredible with the chip.
Well, it's got a metal back,
it's so
David.
hard for anybody else to do that. So
well, the original iPhone had a metal back. They had to ditch it for a plastic back in the iPhone 3G and 3GS and a glass back in the 4 and 4S. And now they've got the metal back, and they're still doing LTE, and they're still doing an antenna. I mean, there's two versions. There's one that's LTE GSM, one that's LTE CDMA. But Nokia makes great radios. We're used to Nokia making stainless steel phones that work great in the middle of a mine shaft. But Apple is now firing at that kind of level of antenna.
Right.
And they didn't even make phones 5 years ago.
No, they've cut up quick on those kinds of things, and they had the lead in the platform, which is incredible how they're combining those two, the incredible hardware expertise with the decades of platform building experience. So yeah, it's a great time for Apple. And today in the bar, the Wi-Fi was so bad. I was on my iPad 3, my new iPad.
Yep.
Running LTE, and I was getting pictures faster than the guys who were on Wi-Fi right next to me.
I live near a tower, but I get 50 sometimes. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's great technology.
So, because you've written a lot about AirPlay, there were rumors that we would get AirPlay Direct, that we would get some form of Wi-Fi Direct that would allow us to beam data straight to other iOS devices and not have to worry about being on the same network. We didn't see that. We didn't see AirPlay Direct. We didn't see, some people were hoping for AirDrop between devices. Was that a miss for you? Was that something you weren't expecting? Or was it something that you think Apple should be looking at?
I've heard a lot of different rumors about a lot of different things from fairly reliable sources that didn't happen today.
Yes.
So I've been really curious whether something's going to happen in the very near future, in the next 5 days, if there's going to be kind of some stuff slip into the developer diffs and, things like that. Or, there's that impending announcement of the iPad mini, supposedly. I mean, that could be one of those things that doesn't come together and they scrap it and, just nothing happens this holiday season.
Well, on that line, just before you continue, I mean, an iPad mini is still a mini iPad. Apple's going to fill a special event. They're going to want to have they talked about iTunes today. There's very little other stuff for them to talk about at the supposed next month event, unless there's a few things in their back pocket.
Yeah, and that's what I'm really curious about. And everything I've heard is just very, very vague, and which left me a little bit surprised today, but again, not very surprised.
Well, here's the thing, and give me your opinion on this, because as someone who's covered Apple rumors for a while, a lot of people say that it's different without Steve Jobs, and most of the time they're 100% wrong, that the things Apple does today is the same thing Steve Jobs did. But it seems to me that Steve Jobs would just be the decider very early on in a lot of processes, and he would change his mind, but Apple was a little bit more predictable. With this event, and I'm not the only one who heard this, other people heard this, Apple was, taking their time. They were waiting, they were discussing things, there was more discussion about the things. So are the iPods going to be in in October or September? Are they going to use this feature now or save it for later? And I think that kind of plays into that. So it's a little bit more exciting for us because we don't know if it's, Tim Cook's going to listen to Forstall maybe, or Schiller maybe, or...
Yeah, it is a weird time for Apple. And I mean, it's tough to tell, what's causing the differences. I mean, as from the iPhone 4 leak to Gizmodo on, it feels like we've gotten, people are just more and more interested, even the financial industry, interested in knowing what Apple's going to do next. So there's not just a lot of like fanboy interest, but there's a lot of money in, knowing what's coming next. And so it does seem like, especially on the hardware side, I was almost disappointed at how little surprise there was on the iPhone, but then shocked at how much surprise there was with the iPod Nano, with the new iPod Touches.
All right, well, let's move along to... Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, let me just throw the chip at you. It is an A6 chip. We some people were saying it would be an A5 series chip again. Some people were saying it would be the A6. All Apple would say is twice as fast CPU, twice as fast graphics. I thought it was interesting they went to A6 because they didn't. Every previous year, the iPad got the faster graphics chip first, and then the iPhone got it later. But this time, the new generation of architecture debuted with the iPhone. Phil Schiller is actually showing some of the stuff. We're showing the video now. Is that a return to the iPhone as the flagship device, or is that just a recognition that the Retina iPad really needed something to drive that display above any other concern?
That's interesting, and I saw a couple of people on Twitter today kind of surprised, like, oh, good, they went ahead and jumped the gun. And that may go back to kind of what you were talking about, that may have been one of those decisions that typically, would have been decided 2 years ago. The iPhone's going to get the A5X that the iPad 3 has. And that may have been one of those things like, hey, let's just go for it. Let's just put the best technology we can in this device. And I'm excited to put that thing in my hand. The speed combined with the new screen and the in-plane switching, the
in-cell display.
The in-cell touch stuff. And, I'm pretty stoked to get this thing in my hand. I think it's going to be a pretty big upgrade.
And there's Rob Murray.
And that may have been part of it, was just, there is an aspect with this device that, it's hard for Apple to kind of bring the new sexy every year. And so the 4S, people were talking about what a disappointment it was.
Yeah.
And I feel like in some ways Apple had to kind of bring it, with the iPhone 5. And so maybe that was a really conscious effort. Like, we need to get the A6 in there because when somebody puts this in their hand, we want them to just be blown away. And, from a competitive standpoint, I mean, competitors are catching up. They really are. And Apple was so far ahead, but it's not a linear catch-up process. Other people have been able to catch up faster than would be expected, partly because they copy.
Well, no, but if you see where someone is, it's easier to run to where they are than to try and figure out how to get there yourself.
Exactly. So yeah, no, it's going to be one hell of a device, and I'm excited to get it in 13 days? No,
9 days.
9 days. Jeez.
Yeah, not this Friday, but next Friday.
There you go.
They're showing a FireMonkey, formerly FireMint, now part of EA. They're always very fast. When the iPhone 3GS came out, they showed off the graphics chips. They showed off AirPlay, Party Play. They're showing off time lapse multiplayer this year. But it's just nice to see the kind of performance, because the iPad 3, it needed so much to drive that display. I mean, people were worried that LTE would be a big drain, but it was the display that basically uses all the GPU, uses all the battery. The iPhone already had Retina, so Apple got that basically for free. The LTE is a bit of a concern, but a lot of this power is going right into the device, David. So everything we do with it is just going to be better. So I think it's a much bigger step up than the iPad 3 was performance-wise from the last generation.
Yeah, the iPad 3 was almost a performance hit from the iPad 2. I mean, I remember the same thing with the iPhone 4. And I was even talking about that with the guys at lunch today. Because have you heard anything about the 3GS at this point? I mean, they didn't say anything about it, being the
emerging markets phone.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they haven't, and that's still an interesting play, but there was nothing specific said about it.
So let's say it does go away. Well, now your baseline device is the iPhone, and even if it doesn't go away, your baseline device is the iPhone 4.
Yep.
Because of the Retina graphics, for most, like animation stuff and games and other things, it can often feel slower on the iPhone 4 than it did on the 3GS.
Yeah, because you're pushing the pixels again, right?
Yeah, you're pushing twice the pixels, and I mean, it's just a lot of. It's just a very processor intensive thing to push so many pixels. So yeah, I think this is going to be that big leap that in the processor. And again, they didn't make a huge leap in the camera. They did in the LTE wireless connectivity. So it's like they had to play all sides and make the leaps where they could.
So what about the audio, David? You're one of my go-to guys for audio. Whenever we've discussed previously what kind of, because other companies, they've got stereo speakers, they've got Dolby surround sound. One of the HTC phones, actually, you would pull it down, an entire speaker assembly would come out like it was the Transformer sound wave or something. They have 3 mics now, which I guess is a recognition that you're using the device for FaceTime, you're using it to talk on the phone, you're using it for Siri. They have to do much more with the mics. And they also showed something off about waveforms, which was way over my head. Was there any substantial audio improvement in here for you?
Well, some of the waveform that they were talking about was, and I don't have all the details on this, but from what I understand, it's about compressing the voice data less in the mid-range, which the mid-range frequencies help with intelligibility of speech. And so if they're able to compress the highs and the lows more heavily and leave the mid-range less compressed, that means you'd have more intelligible natural speech. So it'd be basically easier to hear and understand somebody on a phone call. But I think that has to be supported by the carrier.
Okay.
So it's possible that that the technology is built in, and we'll either see a slow, roll out, or maybe not even see that capability used to its fullest extent. The other waveform stuff, it sounds like the ear pods are a pretty big improvement.
Yeah.
They're not going to be, they compared it to, but they always do, they compared it to the, super high end luxury and audiophile in-ear stuff.
Yeah.
But, it's probably not going to compare that well to those kinds of headphones, but it sounds like they made a pretty big leap. So that's exciting. And then, on the device itself, the thing about audio is you're pushing air around, and, the physicality of it and the physics of it really limit what you can do in such a small device. I mean, there are, you get a woofer in your a subwoofer in your house where the air port is 3 times wider than the iPhone. So, when you're trying to reproduce low frequencies, especially, the physics of it just don't play out very well for such a small device. And then similarly for stereo, the idea with stereo, you have 2 ears. And so, when I used to work in the recording studio and we'd mix a record, we always mixed it in stereo, but we'd spend a lot of time listening to it in mono because we knew, people would have their stereos hooked up wrong. It might get broadcast on TV. They might be listening to it in the car where,
it's like testing for network connectivity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like QAing our audio. And so, most well-recorded music has been mixed with mono in mind. Yeah. And that's just not going to go away for a long time because of TV and other things. So mono audio, you don't get quite the richness of stereo audio. But the way you really get the richness with stereo audio is to have 2 speakers well positioned to actually create a stereo field where you can hear, the bass over there, and you can hear the, guitar over there, and it creates kind of this sound field in front of you. And, in the studio, I used to spend hours and hours, moving things around in the sound field and tweaking on those kind of things. So, of all people, I care about stereo audio. But the bottom line is you just can't reproduce great stereo audio in a tiny little device. And so when a company talks about
Beats by Dre,
Beats by Dre, or 5 speakers in the phone, surround
because
sound,
Monster is our friend,
all this crap, I mean, it's just gimmicks. And so, I was talking to somebody about all this and saying, anytime you hear, or I think it was with the Kindle, they have this new Dolby technology. Dolby's a great company. So, Amazon partnering with them on the audio is actually a good thing. Dolby's not one of those. I mean, they will at times, push out a hype technology, but, they've been around, like 40 or 50 years and have some pretty deep wizardry over there. So it'll be interesting to put the Kindle next to the iPad kind of in a real world condition. But, they're going to take the press, or I guess they already just gave the press the devices. But typically in this kind of situation, and, with the Dre audio stuff, it's like they take you into this special room where it's set up perfectly to make, the Beats audio sound amazing and make the iPad suck or whatever. But when you get in the real world, it's like it's not that big a difference. So I hope the iPhone has a little better audio. I mean, I'm not watching feature-length movies on my iPhone, and if I were, I'd probably put on a headphone. So, my perspective on mobile device audio is that it's not going to be amazing. So, small improvements are great, and you don't want it to be terrible, but it's there's a lot of hype and just not a lot that can be done.
The chat room put in an article, I think it was from Apple Insider, and it looks highly speculative, but they're wondering if Apple Insider is wondering if this is the first Cortex A15 processor, which is the replacement for the A9 that the previous devices had. And it was rumored to be going into production this quarter, but it's still unknown. We're not going to know a lot about the RAM or the processor until someone like iFixit tears it apart.
Oh man, if they put a gig of RAM in this thing,
I hope so.
And they almost have to though, because this stretch screen. I've been spending a lot of time digging into instruments lately, even though I'm not don't code because of the launch issues we had with Launch Center Pro.
Yep.
And it's surprising how fast that 512 megs gets chewed up, and
Yes.
and the more images and the larger images you have, and the more screen real estate the games are using to load textures and things like that. It'd be pretty badass if they put a gig of RAM in. I'll just put it that way. As much as a processor is going to improve the feeling of speed, if an app doesn't get pushed from RAM, so
Yes.
if apps get pushed out of RAM half as often because you've got a gig of RAM, which is probably not even a 50-50 thing, because the system takes up a considerable portion of the RAM already. So you're actually maybe getting 60% more free RAM, or 70% even. So that could be really nice. So I'm excited to hear.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
What did happen, we heard about this back in February, I think, that Apple was going to ditch the dock, that they decided that Wi-Fi sync, that AirPlay, that their technologies for wireless were robust enough that they didn't need all the pins that they had in the 30 pin, but also they needed space. They wanted to put LTE, they wanted the battery to support it, and it was just time for a change. And lo and behold, we got the new dock connector, and 9to5Mac last night heard it was going to be called Lightning. So Lightning to go with Thunderbolt. Sounds like the Wonder Twins. But
Kate Apple's naming.
Yeah, sometimes they're really classy, and sometimes they're really awkward.
Yeah.
It's like that guy in high school.
They generally get the big things right.
Yes.
iPhone, iPad, iPod. That's a really nice lineup. Some of the confusion, we talked about earlier, but Lightning,
Yeah. Especially because it's slower than Thunderbolt. And Thunderbolt,
yeah.
you'd expect that Thunder is slower than Lightning. Maybe they messed up. Maybe the first one was meant to be, because the thing was Light Peak or something. That was the original name, and they changed it to Thunderbolt. So for people who, as much as we as developers have a hard time with Apple, it is nothing compared to accessory makers. The NDAs they have to sign, the lack of information they have is horrendous to deal with. And a lot of people made accessories that needed 30 pins. They were scientific instruments that needed the serial in and out, or they were AV cables that needed the composite or component. And that is all just gone. There's not even HDMI out. There's not even VGA out. Apple is basically letting you charge and sync with this cable, and I believe it's still got the proprietary control chip. Is it too early for that?
Well, is it too early to make those statements?
No, on the website, there's no HDMI listed on.
No, but see, Apple could, and it sounds like even the 30 pin to what are they to Lightning?
Yes.
Or whatever. The 30 pin to Lightning even has a chip in it, so it's possible that they will release dongles that you can do HDMI, and so there's just a chip in there that's going to transcode or do whatever it needs to do. So,
but if it's giving it out, we don't know if there's actually any video or because it says if you go to the adapter right now, it says does not support video or iPod out.
Right, but it's saying it doesn't support the current generations of outputs. Those were analog outputs. Like the signal coming out of the device was already formatted.
Yes. They had their own pins.
Right.
Yes.
And so it was like hooking the HDMI cable directly into
whatever the old FireWire pins became HDMI pins.
Yeah. So it's yet to be seen, though. They talked about this being kind of an all-digital connector and stuff. So we don't know if they have accessories in the works that kind of re-enable a lot of those things. Now, that might not help accessory makers, but I'm just saying, I don't know.
That's a fair point.
Are completely abandoning all potential interoperability, and we don't even know what they have planned for this. it sounds like, the weird thing about the 30 pins is when you have to dedicate pins to each specific thing, and you have to hard code so much of what it does. In some ways, that's actually more limiting than having a true digital port into a device. And so I think there's actually potential in the long run for Lightning to actually be a more innovative, who says it like that? Innovative solution in the long run because of it being a fully digital solution.
Well, that's the dream, right? Like that people will have breakout boxes or breakout cables that will take that signal and do in software what Apple used to do in hardware.
Right, exactly. So or even do like system on a chip inside a dongle, what Apple used to do in hardware. So, I don't think that the book has been written yet on whether the move is good or bad for innovation around the dock connector. As far as aesthetics and ease of use, I am incredibly excited as a user to get this new thing. I mean, how many times in the middle of the night are you trying to plug in the damn 30-pin connector?
Oh, wrong way. Oh, wrong way again, but I turned it. How can it be wrong way both ways?
I know. It's like Murphy's Law. Every single time I try and plug in it. So, there's a lot of really good things about it. And then, and the bottom line, too, is that, we're talking about all the possibilities of physically connecting to an iPhone, but the reality is there's less and less need to physically connect to an iPhone anyways. I actually bought a heart rate monitor for working out with the low power Bluetooth 4. It works amazingly well.
Bluetooth 4 is fantastic.
The pairing was so easy. The setup every time I just launched the app. So I think, we're going to continue, or I've been disappointed, honestly, in the innovation I've seen in those kinds of accessories, even with the dock connector accessories.
It's been so slow.
I've expected for years for these, amazing, cool new things to be developed around this amazing platform that Apple's built.
It was iOS 3, right, when they introduced it?
What's that?
iOS 3, I think they started talking about their accessory access.
Yeah, and we haven't seen these like amazing, innovative solutions that connect to the dock connector. So what are we really losing? And so I hope to see with Bluetooth 4, with Wi-Fi, potentially with Wi-Fi Direct, if they announce it and do that later this fall. I hope we see a lot more innovation, and I don't think that the dock connector is going to prevent that.
No. It did strike me, though, that on the Apple page, it does not list any sort of video out. It just says video out available via AirPlay and Apple TV.
Right.
So we won't count it out, but I'm not going to count it in yet until it says it. I don't believe anything until it's on Apple.com.
Right. But, they didn't have a Thunderbolt to FireWire cable.
Nope.
Until a year after Thunderbolt shipped. So they might take their time and still be sorting all that stuff out.
Yeah, and we have to figure out exactly, because it doesn't look like it's USB 3 either, which I saw some people on Twitter saying that I think it was Chris Rawson from Tua saying that you can't even saturate NAND flash write speeds with USB 2 yet either, so who needs USB 3? But I'm just saying there's not a lot we know about the Lightning connector yet.
Right, and it's not to say it can't be upgraded in the future either. So.
Yes. So let's... any final thoughts on the iPhone before we switch over to the iPods? It's the same pricing, same storage capacity. We did not get 128 gigabytes. It will be available next Friday in a lot of countries. It'll be available very quickly a week later, and I think they said it's going to be 100 countries this year. So Apple's ability to project their product is still unbelievably good compared to any other manufacturer. I guess people... And this is a point that I made in my article. It's like we go into the room, we peek at our birthday presents, but we still have this little hope that mom and dad have hidden some surprise away. Scott Forstall came out. He did iOS 6, and except for panoramas, it was the same iOS 6 we saw at WWDC. There was no FaceTime. There was no Siri. There was no one more iOS 6 thing. Is that okay at this point in the iPhone's development, David, or do you think that they needed a little surprise there at the end?
I put iOS 6 on my device about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, finally, with Beta 4, or not right when Beta 4 came out, but I've been a little surprised at how it doesn't feel that different.
Yeah.
And it seems as though every year there was something big, Siri on iOS 5. I mean, there was a lot in iOS 5.
Yeah, iOS 5 was huge. iCloud.
Notification Center, iCloud. iOS 4 had a lot of stuff. It's, this does seem like an oddly scant update from a, strictly speaking, from a user-facing feature.
Yes.
And I think a lot of us at WWDC were talking about, they're going to announce this big, they have something in their pocket, and we're going to see something big and new in the fall. And so,
well, here's what I heard. My understanding was that Apple's priorities were to get rid of Google and take control of location on iOS, to start with the mobile payment system with Passbook, and basically just to take control of ownership and destiny of their platform. And because of that, because they had to spend so much time on rebuilding Maps and on building the Passbook, they did not have time to do other things on the list. It's like that famous Greg Joswiak line when he said, yes, cut and paste is on the list. It's just not the first thing on the list. So
I've never even heard that one. That's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's like no company, you know this, you're a developer, you can't do everything at once. Everything is an opportunity cost. Doing feature A means you can't do feature B at the same time. And Apple chose almost, I don't know if it's a snow leopard path, but they chose to invest in their platform rather than a bunch of customer-facing features this time.
Yeah, well, and I will say, and we talked about this at WWDC, that this is also a developer release, and I think, hasn't that somewhat been the pattern, that like iOS 2 was the App Store,
yes,
and was kind of the big developer release and didn't get a lot of user-facing features. Then 3 got a lot of user-facing features, and then 4 was more, they worked more on the APIs and stuff, and then 5 was the big user feature release, and then 6. So it was
coincidental. Like, we got multitasking because developers got multitasking.
Right. So yeah, it seems as though maybe they have internally at least set up that kind of snow leopard, mountain lion kind of yin and yang, or what did you call it?
TikTok, yeah.
So, from a developer's perspective, it's a pretty incredible release. I mean, I've been thinking over the last couple of weeks, especially with this bigger screen, some of the technologies that they enabled in iOS 6 are going to make developing apps for both the large and small screens so much easier. And so, I'm probably going to be going iOS 6 on a lot of my apps, much more quickly than I normally would, just because of all the amazing stuff they've done in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're in the talk cycle, and I was expecting other things, and I had heard rumors of other things, and they didn't announce anything. So whether those things weren't ready, or whether I just heard stuff that just wasn't even true,
or it's iPad Mini October. We don't know that yet either.
Yeah, and that that's another big thing to throw in the mix. They're probably working really hard on that right now as well, and we're not even sure exactly how that's going to play out. Software wise, and whether they could introduce a whole new screen size into the platform. And in some ways, I'll say this: with iOS 6 and the stuff they've built into iOS 6. It would surprise me less now to see them introduce a new screen resolution than it would have, 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I would still be surprised, but I would be less surprised, because it's kind of like they gave us all these tools for the iPhone 5, and some of those would actually translate to, reworking iPad apps to a different, pixel resolution.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It's gonna, a lot happened today, but it's not over. So it's going to be an interesting rest of the fall.
I thought maybe I'd heard some talk that there might still be even more Siri stuff. And again, maybe they're waiting. Maybe it's not finished yet. But one of the things that people have been saying is Google now is doing very interesting things. For example, it's got search on board. So, it's got the parsing, the speech parsing on board. So you don't need a network connection all the time just to parse what the person is saying. And they're doing sort of what Roger McNamee promised that WebOS would eventually do, but never did, did, and that it's contextually aware. It knows where you are, when you are, what your appointments are, and it doesn't wait for you to ask it stuff. It starts predicting things and giving you things when it thinks you need them. Like it adjusts traffic for you, it adjusts calendar stuff for you. We haven't seen that step taken, but we have heard from the people who made Siri that that's why they built Siri and that's what they've been working on. So that could be another one of those things that you said is just staged out as part of the deployment.
Yeah, and all of that may be an iOS 7 thing. So yeah.
We need something for 6.1. They already gave us Panorama. There's no.
Has Apple done any major features in a 0.1 release though?
HDR. They did earlier on. We had like the iTunes Store was 1.1. So they're very, but iOS 5 I think got very little because 5.0 was so massive.
Yeah. Yeah, they hardly did anything between iOS 5 and 6.
They fiddled with the fast camera access.
Very small. Yeah, those were very small. Yeah, except for pulling our settings access.
Do you think that you'll be using Passbook? I mean, the thing for me that makes Passbook compelling is, first, I hate having extra cards in my wallet. I don't want the giant wallet. But more than that is I put these cards in my wallet and then I forget that I have them and I go and buy something when I could get a discount or I could get points and I don't get them. But this will show you on your lock screen. It'll put updates. It'll keep your balance. It takes off it doesn't only take stuff out of my wallet. It takes things out of my memory system. So I'm kind of excited about it.
Yeah, Passbook may kind of be the dark horse, and some has been written, but it hasn't been hyped very much. But it's definitely a system that Apple can iterate on, and third-party developers can innovate on, that kind of might turn out to be the more interesting thing that comes out of iOS 6. So we'll see. I've never had a bunch of those, loyalty cards and things like that. So I'm not personally super interested at the moment. But it sounds like there's a lot of cool potential. So we'll see.
All right. So speaking of cool potential, Apple finally pulled, and I'm going to use one of those dreaded finalists here. They finally pulled the trigger on iTunes 11, which looks like a very significant update. We didn't see what happened with the Windows version, if anything. Drop a menu bar right on the window and see what that looked like. But it's clean. It's still a database-driven app. You still got rows and columns of data, but a lot of white space. It looks very elegant. Is iTunes still that relevant? I think it is for people who manage large libraries.
I was complaining about this on Twitter just the other day. Every time I launch iTunes right now, it tries to download about 100 gigs of movies and TV shows and stuff. And so every time I launch it, I have to go to the downloads and delete all these incoming, TV shows I bought and stuff. And because I'm a heavy Apple TV user and subscribe to The Daily Show and have bought tons of seasons of shows and stuff like that, there's been times if I launch it and I forget, it'll download 40 gigs of stuff.
I'm the same way.
I just go delete it because I don't want it on my hard drive.
I like the Apple TV model where you just stream. Yeah.
So I have hardly launched iTunes at all, probably even in the last year. So to me, it's sad that it took them this long to do it because it is much less relevant than it was 2 years ago. So, I think between iCloud with the backups and sync, iTunes Match for the audio, and then, you can, this was a very slow kind of incremental thing, but in iOS 5, the whole getting movies and TV shows that you've previously purchased, now I can't, I haven't found anything from iTunes that I can't just download on the fly. Yeah. So I don't side load my device at all.
Me either.
Me and my family were going on a trip earlier this year, and so I was loading up my iPod for the kids and getting a couple movies through the plane and stuff like that. And I was like, oh crap, I gotta sync it to my device, and I gotta.
It's such a hassle.
My MacBook Pro, and I gotta figure out iTunes and get it on. I was like, wait a minute. And I went to the iTunes store on the iPad and downloaded 20 gigs of stuff. and got all the apps and the movies, and I just I queued them all up, and I woke up the next morning and they were all just there. And it was wasteful of bandwidth, but
so convenient.
That's what you do these days. You waste bandwidth. It's free and cheap.
Well, they cut the cord. I mean, I think you should have they should just let you cut it completely.
So iTunes 11, I don't really care. I probably launch it 3 times in the next 6 months.
Well, maybe don't.
Honestly, I'm serious.
Well, I don't believe the Goldmaster build is an over-the-air update, so either Xcode or iTunes is going to get launched for that one.
Now, hey, have you heard anything? Because I was talking to somebody else about this. For users, is moving from iOS 5.1.1 to iOS 6 going to be over the air? Or are they going to have to download and get the full system update? Have you heard anything?
I heard last year that you would never have to download iOS again, but I don't know if that's still true, because that's one of those things where you say it and then a year later some harsh reality might surface and you'd have to reassess that. I don't think they ever publicly announced that.
That's going to be really interesting, because if they've fully made that a reality, there's just so much to that. I mean, the adoption of iOS 5 at this point has been amazing. So, most of my apps are all either or moving towards iOS 5 only. But in very short time, if it's an over-the-air update, we're going to be able to go to iOS 6 only. So,
but there's a whole generation, like a year's worth of anyone who bought an iPhone 4S or iPad 3 or later has never done an iTunes software update, conceivably. And they may not even know how.
Right. Or may not have a device to do it.
Yeah.
We're at that point now where so much of the market that's buying them now don't have a computer. Or, I can remember, my parents didn't even have a computer for a while. And so when they were like setting up their iPhones and syncing and stuff, my brother would have to bring his laptop over. They'd have to take it over to his house. And like, it was crazy. The what people go through to own an iPhone when you don't have a computer to sync it with. So I think that's all gone, and I hope it's an over-the-air update, and I think it's going to be incredible for the platform if they pull it off.
So I'm going to move us along to the next big topic, and I was surprised that I wasn't totally shocked, but the iPods came after the iPhone. Usually the iPhone gets the main event, but some of the stuff on the iPod would have spoiled the iPhone, so I can understand why Apple did it. This is the old iPod. This is the history of the iPod Nano. Sorry, you can see it going all the way from the fat E to the thin E to the round E to the square E. There was one leak of this. I believe Mako Takara had a concept model of the iPod Nano rectangular with the home button. I don't believe it's running iOS still. I think it's still running, I forget, it's Pico, whatever it's called, with an iOS looking veneer, but it looks like a good device. I mean, Dan Rubino from our Windows site was saying it looks like a tiny Nokia. Some people said it looks like an iPhone Nano, but the new Nano looks hot.
I kind of feel like, boy, that would have looked hot about 2 years ago. I mean, honestly,
that's fair.
We had a big debate at lunch today talking about like who cares at this point. And Isaiah has kids that are like 7, 8, 9, 10, some in those ranges, and was saying most of the kids that age now either have an iPod Touch or an iPhone. So. Yeah. It seems, and the conclusion we came to is it's just kind of like a device for people who run.
It's a legacy device.
It's almost the whole iPod line, except for the iPod Touch, is kind of an odd thing at the moment. And I feel like the iPod Nano is even somewhat like the iPod Classic. Yeah. Like, it doesn't fully have a place in the iOS world anymore, but I think the bottom line for Apple is that they keep selling, and so they're just going to keep making them until they stop selling. And I bet there's people at Apple like, we're working on this.
It's like their version of iOS 5. They wish they could move on, but they have legacy users.
yeah, it's like, this is kind of cool. And, I would have really loved to have this but I mean, I just can't imagine that many people at Apple who are even working on it. Like, this is amazing. I'm going to use this every day. And, I mean, you think back at like when the iPod was the iPod, but, gosh, and I should have a better memory of like who points out these really great things on Twitter and things I read. But somebody was talking about how Apple did such an amazing job disrupting itself in that you most companies would have never thought to build an iPhone that would obsolete the iPod. Like, you don't build a whole new device category that completely obsoletes your cash cow. But they did, and that's kind of where we're at. That it's the iPod line now, except for the iPod Touch, it just sits in this weird netherworld of randomness. I mean, and
look at that white square around it. It looks very odd.
Yeah, and I know. I think it's a beautiful device. I mean, it's different. It does have the very Nokia look to it. So I think it's a cool device, but I just don't know that it has a place.
So the interesting thing is,
like, I bought the iPod Nano last year, and I was really excited to get it and play with it. And I thought maybe they would open a like mini SDK to it or something,
or make it a notification center extension or something.
Right, but it's been a white noise player for my daughter. I never used it.
Yeah.
So they're just in this weird world. But on the topic, I really wonder if at some point in the not too distant future, if the iPod name will actually completely go away.
It might. I mean, so a couple of things. So first, as to what you were saying previously, I did an editorial a while ago where I was talking about Apple, and they are one of the few companies that actually does it right, in my opinion, because most companies mistake their product for their business. And Microsoft is a classic example. They believe heart and soul that they are a Windows company, and that will one day cost them dearly. Apple never thought that they were an iPod company. The iPod was a manifestation of them being a consumer electronics company. And they don't ride the success and failure of any one product. The next one will come and replace that one. They know exactly what they do, and they keep putting out new versions of it. I think that's supremely important. But with regards to this, people saw it becoming like a watch. They wore it as a watch. They had it on a strap. There were rumors of Bluetooth. We got the Bluetooth, but it looks like Apple abandoned the idea of a watch with this, unless there's going to be a whole new slate.
Yeah, or is it coming in October?
the actual watch. the iWatch. I mean, maybe the Nano gets split from the watch line.
Yeah, maybe. But I think what I was saying about the iPod name going away, I don't think I blogged about it, but I guess I tweeted and talked to a few people about it. But I could see at some point there being an iPad, an iPad Mini, and an iPad Nano. Or at some point the iPod Touch, as Moore's law takes effect, right now it's kind of just like a cheap iPhone without 3G. And so if they can build a cheaper like iPhone Mini that doesn't require a contract, or I think there's directions they could head with the device families, that the iPod at some point just doesn't make sense anymore when you have all these devices that do those things. So it's interesting. And I don't know. I mean, I guess there's always room for a dedicated music device. I mean, music is such a, part of our human existence and societies. And so it plays such an important role. And so maybe there will always be that need. But I think for a significant portion of the population, the need for a dedicated music device has been obsoleted, and there'll always be a niche, and they make good money, so they'll keep making them until they stop making good money. But
it's a unitasker in a multitasker world.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect analysis.
So which brings us to the iPod Touch. The lower end iPod Touch is sticking around at $199, but the $199 now gets you 16 gigs instead of just 8 gigs. And I kind of wonder, because we heard the iPad Mini would be around the same price, but for 8 gigs, whether Apple's playing a little game of you get storage size or you get physical size for the same price. They also, though, introduced this new iPod Touch. If you thought the last one was light and thin, oh boy, this one looks like a razor blade. It got the new screen. We heard that earlier. It looks like a good device. The thing that impressed me the most was that they managed to put an iPhone 4 quality camera in something this thin. That I thought was a good achievement.
Yeah, the iPod, for a while now, there's aspects of the iPod Touch design that I wish were in the iPhone. Like you pick up an iPod Touch after using your iPhone, and the iPhone starts to feel like a brick.
Yeah.
And as far as industrial design and everything else, I think the iPod Touch is where it's at this point. I think it's an incredibly good looking device, amazingly thin. I think it's going to be really nice. I'm going to get one.
Oh, I'm going to get one too. I mean, unencumbered by a cell phone radio, Apple's design can really kind of take off, and it's nice to see. So you get the widescreen video, you get, I don't know, 2 years ago, last year they just gave it the color white. 2 years ago, they didn't give it the IPS panel at a much cheaper panel than the iPhone got, but it looks like it has an iPhone quality screen. It comes in colors this year for the first time. So my question is that a symbol of its new status as a more mainstream device? So it's more like the Shuffles and the Nanos, and the iPad mini takes the black and white place on that shelf with the iPad and the iPhone, David?
Yeah, again, I think the whole iPod line is just kind of in a little bit of a transition space at the moment.
Well, they're not selling, right? Every quarter after quarter, year after year, they go down in numbers.
Right, but the iPod Touch does really well. Have they been breaking out the iPod Touch in their quarterly earnings reports?
They say that it is roughly half of iPod sales, but those iPod sales have been declining steeply. So my guess is that half of less is still less.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't pay a ton of attention because, as a maker of productivity apps, that market seems to be anecdotally, more kind of kids and teens, and, most adults who are shopping for productivity apps are on the iPhone. So I don't pay as close attention to that market, but I do think the pricing is really odd. And you were talking about that, you have this iPod Touch that's been out, 2 years now that hasn't seen a hardware upgrade in 2 years, and they're still selling it for $200. Yeah. I kind of thought a little bit today, and I don't, this sounds kind of rhetorical or whatever, but it almost felt greedy in a way. Like, as a developer, I want to see as many devices as possible at the cheapest possible price so that more people can buy my software. And, conversely, Apple wants as many apps as can be in the App Store cheaply and free to sell their devices. Yeah. But it's a really interesting play. And this may be one of the pricing decisions where it may somewhat come back to bite them in the ass, in that I think it just leaves a little bit more room for somebody to think, I could get an iPod Touch, or I could get a Kindle Fire HD.
Or an iPad mini.
Or an iPad mini, or Nexus 7, or it just kind of, the iPod Touch was always this kind of like no-brainer,
lowest point of entry to the App Store.
And not just lowest point of entry to the App Store, like lowest point of entry to an amazing, like, Palm computer.
Yes.
For as far as mobile computing went, Samsung tried and other people tried to kind of compete in that iPod Touch space. And maybe that's Apple's pricing decision, was that, at $200, it's, nobody has yet really competed well with the iPod Touch, so we can just keep selling it for what we want to sell.
And the bill of goods, I believe, was $150, might be $140. So if you add manufacturing costs to it, Apple's probably around $150, $160 on that.
Yeah. So, but, and 2 years in, so it's an interesting move. And, I've always wondered if Apple at some point would not play the pricing game in the traditional sense, like just, go cutthroat like Amazon's trying to do and make it up on content. But I even posted about the Apple TV. I made a case for the $49 Apple TV, where it's almost like a no-brainer accessory to any iOS device versus, $100. So, Apple continually chooses the high profit margin when a lot of us might think they should not, and continue to play into the volume and use a different pricing strategy. But Apple has proven themselves able to make money. So as much as I'm sitting here, questioning why they did it and what that's going to mean, obviously, they know what they're doing more than I do. So, but it's something to kind of keep an eye on. It'll be, if they ever break those sales numbers out, it's going to be really fascinating to see how well a $300 iPod Touch sells against a $200 iPhone, with a contract, of course, but still an option for a lot of people. And with, one thing I hadn't even thought about until just now is that if you look at all the pricing plans on, in the US anyways, for Verizon and AT&T, with the shared data pools, the shared minutes, the shared texting, I think a lot of parents this Christmas are just going to go ahead and get a $200 iPhone. And, it's a $10 additional fee to put a device on your plan. So you're talking $210 to get your kid an iPhone, and turn off, put parental controls on and turn off the phone, or set it up well as an emergency device or whatever. But there's a really interesting dynamic there in their product line right now. And those other factors with AT&T and Verizon make it really interesting too. So, we'll see what happens. And maybe that's their play, is like, we've got the carriers right where we want them. They're subsidizing $400 a device. We'd rather keep the iPod Touch high in price to drive iPhone sales, which have much higher gross margins.
Which I think is our most lucrative. Chris Umiastowski, one of our columnists, our financial whiz, wrote he was interested in the Kindle Fire model, which I'm not sold on yet, because I like the idea that I give Apple money, they give me a box, and we can part company at the end of the date. Whereas with the Kindle Fire, I feel this expectation to buy content to subsidize the device, and if they can't sell me content, they won't even sell me the device. But he was wondering if, Apple has an iTunes affiliate program, whether there'd ever be a time when Apple would cut carriers in on app sales via the affiliate program to get subsidized data plans, so that you'd get your LTE cheaper. Anything you bought over LTE would give whatever percentage, I think it's 5 or 10% affiliate fee back to the carrier. I don't know if that model would work, but I think it's interesting that Apple could eventually do alternative or non-traditional models.
I think that's interesting, but it just doesn't seem like the kind of game Apple likes to play. It just seems like, especially with their position and strength in the market, at this point, it's kind of like they just don't have to play that game. But even beyond that, even if competitors were doing really well and growth was slowing and everything, I think there's a lot of other ways for them to make things work without having to acquiesce to the carriers in that way.
Deal with the devil.
And at the end of the day, there's just not that much money in it. And Apple's kind of getting to a point now. I mean, I'm surprised they haven't bought Akamai, and I'm surprised they haven't. From what it looks like, and I'm not a big cloud guy, but from what I've heard and what it looks like, Apple is running the App Store on crazy enterprise Oracle solutions with really expensive. So they're not making a lot of money on that. So before they would even go sign deals with carriers to play those kind of games, I would think they'd be they probably have a team of 10, 20 engineers somewhere, like, let's get our dang App Store more under our control and in a better place. But I don't know. I mean, they Steve always had a good relationship with Oracle, and so maybe that's good. But I don't. The Amazon model is surprising it's surprising to me that Amazon would be so clear in discussing that and making that their model, because
Their pitch, yeah.
Because their profits are razor thin.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it'd be interesting to do the math, and hopefully somebody will, but it's like, if every single person on earth had an Amazon Prime account, you know, what would that compare to Apple's current level of profits, or where they might be in 2 years? And you know, you can only sell so many, you know, razors, you know, with high margin razor blades, but they're selling razors at cost and then selling most of their razor blades at razor thin margin. So I don't know, man. I mean, Bezos is a or is it Bezos?
Bezos, I believe it's Bezos.
Today. Yeah, somebody said Bezos. Yeah. Anyways, you know, he's a brilliant guy, and they're doing some interesting things over there at Amazon. And as many people have said, I think that, you know, they're one of the smarter companies that is competing well with Apple in a lot of areas. But man, you know, a 310 PE ratio, you know, the market has given them a huge runway of good faith that they're going to be able to work this out. But,
which Apple has not afforded.
No, yeah, it's crazy that the most dominant player on earth that's been growing like crazy is not afforded that, and yet Amazon, who's been in existence 15 years now, you know, they've proven they can make these models work, but on the scale they're currently making,
yeah, but Dave, you know that
on the
people pay for the
scale.
People pay for the potential to make money. No one really wants to make money. They just want they want to be in before you start making the money.
Yeah, and that's been Amazon's investors for
ever
12 years now. So
the one thing I just saw it in the slide is they're actually keeping around both iPod. They have a 16 and 32 gigabyte old iPod and a 32 and 64 gigabyte new iPod. So for $50 less, you can get the old generation for the same capacity, which Apple doesn't usually do. Previously, it was always the old model was the smallest size iPod. So you had 1, 2, 3. Now they're overlapping on those. I think that's a little bit odd.
Yeah. Again, I think the entire strategy with the iPod Touches right now is odd. So
do you have a preference, David? Black or white iPhone?
Black. The anodized black looks really nice.
All the anodized aluminum stuff is really, I mean, it really shows Apple's nifty. Johnny Ive is so good with materials.
Yeah. And, you know, and I still don't like the two-tone stuff, but it looks like the black is a little bit less noticeable, the two-tone.
Yeah, blacked out.
It's an interesting design decision, and I forget I think there's a whole kind of segment of product marketing, you know, psychology surrounding this. But it's interesting that they would do that duotone thing on the back of the device, because it when you're holding the device up to your ear, people are going to see, and when you're holding it out and looking at it, people are going to see that two-tone and know you have an iPhone 5.
Yes.
And it's a very distinctive design, and even if it's not as good looking as I would have expected from Apple, I feel like it's almost like a product marketing decision that we need to have something that really like stands out and is distinctive. And I mean, if we see a Samsung with these dual stripes, you know, that's going to be a huge embarrassment to them, and I would hope Apple lays a smackdown on something like that. But it is important for somebody like Apple to have users evangelizing their devices. And so, you know, if somebody, you know, sees a celebrity out and about, and these days it's hard to tell. I mean, I see devices from 10 feet away and I think they're iPhones, and I get a little closer and they're not.
That's $1 billion problem.
It's a huge problem. And so if you're going to have all these celebrities and, you know, the hip people, you know, that's who you want to seed your devices to, and you want them out there in public, you know, where people can see them using it. And so it may have been one of those things where, you know, I would hope Johnny Ive cringed just a little bit at that duotone. it just has not caught my eye yet. Maybe it'll be different in person, and maybe I'll fall in love and everything. But
you're right. It's a status symbol. People were pissed when the 3GS looked the same as the 3G, and they were pissed when the 4S looked the same as the 4 because people wouldn't know they had the new iPhone.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. And like you said, I mean, it's a $1 billion problem to have competitors looking like you, but it's probably a multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of kind of the ego trip, like people won't know I still have a 4 because nobody can tell.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting.
All right. Well, I think we pretty much went through the event. Any final thoughts, David? Anything that struck you as insanely great or as a missed opportunity?
There's.
I'm putting you on the spot, I know.
Yeah, no, and like we talked about at WWDC, I mean, I always have my wishes and hopes, and you always have those, unicorns and rainbows that you hope Apple does, and yet they iterate and iterate and continually push forward. So I almost feel like I can't really even fully comment on that until after this supposed October event, because some of the stuff I'm still really excited about, like AirPlay, seems like it could fit really well into an October event. So I am really disappointed that we didn't see AirPlay Direct. I mean, I've been saying that for like 2 years, with dual Wi-Fi chips in a device and dual Wi-Fi chip, or even single Wi-Fi chip in a device and a dual in the AirPlay, or however you arrange it. If you can get those devices talking directly to each other and then getting their internet connection somewhere else, it just opens up incredible possibilities for, lower latency gameplay, for, higher
you remove the middleman
bandwidth. Yeah, you remove, and most importantly though, the problem with AirPlay as it currently stands, and I think the reason people haven't been as excited and haven't built the apps and innovated on AirPlay is that you can't guarantee a good Wi-Fi setup. I mean, you go into most people's homes these days, and even my parents, I had them set up pretty well for a while, and then their Airport Express went out, and I had it set up on a table where it was higher, and then they put it like under this like metal desk, and,
in a Faraday box.
Yeah, and then the Airport Express finally went out, and so they went and bought like the cheapest, Wi-Fi router and had my brother go over and set it up. And so, when I go,
don't tell David about the Linksys.
When I go visit them, and if I'm in one of the bedrooms further away from the office where they keep the Wi-Fi router, I can't even hardly get Wi-Fi. Yeah. And so the problem is, and I'm dragging this out, but the problem is, you can't depend on a reliable Wi-Fi connection, and you're going to have latency issues and so many unknowns with AirPlay. And so as cool as it has been as a demo tech, it's hard to build a business around that. I mean, people are doing innovative stuff like SketchPlay TV and real racing with the mirroring, and there's a lot of fun stuff, and I play with that stuff. But I think when they, with the Direct, if they can eliminate the unknown and have two fast Wi-Fi chips that are both running iOS talking to each other, I think there's going to be some really incredible stuff that could come out of that. And so I hope that hasn't been shelved to iOS 7, and I hope that that's something they're going to talk more about in October or between now and then, or in a point release in the near future.
I'm going to echo that, and I'm going to add that I'm always impressed with the videos that Apple puts out, and I'm also always impressed how people complain about Apple, but Apple has explained the reasons why they do things plainly in the videos. And in this one, in the presentation, they said that they wanted to start off by taking the iPhone and making it thinner and lighter, but just as good, not sacrificing anything for it. And while it looks like an iPhone 4 and 4S, if you watch the manufacturing process, it was astounding. I think that Johnny Ive is arguably better at building machines that make Apple products than he is at building Apple products. Right. They showed a demo where the camera scanned 700 pieces to find the best fit before assembling the front plate. It's ludicrous. We saw this with the MacBook Air. Apple literally invents the technology to make their technology and then finances the factories to build the machines, and they lets them be 2 years ahead. And just because this phone looks like the previous phone, it's not built like it at all. It is a unibody. It's not stainless steel anymore. It's aluminum. It's anodized aluminum. It is an incredibly well-built, incredibly advanced phone. And I give Apple a lot of credit. And I give Johnny Ive a lot of credit for sticking to making this phone better instead of just changing it for change's sake. It's that thing that he said in Objectified, where it's inevitable. And I think you said this too, David, in one of the previous shows, that especially with Timer, you were talking about Timer and how trivial it is to copy those kinds of things, which is sort of like the Samsung lawsuit. It takes an enormous amount of effort to make something that seems obvious and simple. And people take that for granted, but we know how hard that is. And it's going to be easy to copy, but I give Apple a lot of credit for sticking to their guns and making this kind of phone.
Well, it is and it isn't. That's a really odd tension in tech right now. So you have Nokia and you have Apple, who have the chops to build these incredible devices that inspire, whose materials. I heard again. I probably will just buy a Lumina this fall, just so I can really experience it. But I heard from so many people that in day-to-day use, the previous Lumina with that special kind of plastic body, that it just had a really nice feel in the hand. And, even the, Motorola, who's been around forever, and Samsung and HTC, they just aren't building devices at that level. And so you can copy the aesthetics of the iPhone 5, but nobody's really going to be able to copy the depth and the polish. But what's weird, and I see it, you brought up Timer, I spent a ton of time really, and it was an idea that had kind of gestated for months and months and maybe even years of just wanting a really dead simple timer app. And so it all came together in this just ultra minimalist, super easy to copy. But if you look at the people who ripped it off, it was good enough, but it wasn't the same thing. Yeah. And so it's going to be interesting to see how people react to see if and how people really get the ways that an iPhone is different. Because it's surprising to even see tech journalists really not get it, where they compare the two and are like,
we're jaded, Dave. We're jaded, and we have an artificial sense of fairness that is often devoid of reality.
It's true. How could you hold a Samsung device, and people, to give credit, there's a lot of people who talk about this, in their reviews and stuff, about, holding this plastic device that has a lot of flex, that, breaks more easily when you drop it and stuff. And this unibody construction, in my mind, I haven't gotten to play with the one yet, but it seems to be this, it's similar to the Retina MacBook Pro, this kind of ultimate iteration, the device that Johnny Ive always wanted to build.
Form iPhone.
Yeah. And so, and it's, Apple's in some ways not leaving themselves a lot of room to go. Because if you look at their laptop designs over the last few years, once they hit unibody, they've been making changes, but it's, there hasn't been kind of a major
improvements more than changes.
Right. There's been that slow iterative thing versus a big leap and a big change. And so I think we're kind of potentially getting to that point with the iPhone, where it's kind of that is the manifestation of a handheld touch, multi-touch
It'll be
device.
Just a display. It'll be like in Tony Stark's phone or the Avatar phone. I'm going to do, we had a few questions I want to just get to really quickly before we wrap things up. And
Sure.
So what is your take? This is from Tim Krob. What is your take on the lack of IMAX? That is October. I don't believe those were ever scheduled for September. There's a lot of questions about carriers, and the reason there's a lot of questions about carriers is because carriers always wait until after the last minute to make substantive specific announcements so that even their customer service reps do not know what is happening on launch day. I don't think that'll change. I hope it does, but we will publish. We've already got press releases up on iMore from Verizon, I believe, from Sprint. We'll keep putting that information up, and as they know, we will let you know.
Screw AT&T.
How long does it take Apple to make the keynotes available? The stream is already up. The iTunes download and the YouTube version will probably follow. Why haven't Sprint and AT more carrier questions? Because they're really slow. All answers is going to be because they're slow. Has Apple lost their magic for good? No, you've lost your mind. How much RAM does the iPhone 5 have? We will find out when iFixit tears it apart. My guess and David's is our hope is a gig. David, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Where can we find out more about you?
You can find me on Twitter, Dr. Barnard, DrBarnard, appcubby.com, and my apps, Launch Center Pro, Timer, Gas Cubby, Trip Cubby, and I have a mirror app. I got somebody dinged me in the Mac Rumors forums, like, why do you listen to this guy? He has a mirror app. What the hell does he have to expertise or experience? That damn little mirror app. And I'm always embarrassed to even say it's got over 1 million downloads. It does over 3,000 downloads a day. Yeah, it's embarrassing to me as a developer who cares to have this app that's out there that gets those kind of downloads. It's a freaking mirror app. But
it's a social studies case. It's a social case study.
It's my little sandbox, so I'm going to be doing a lot of experiments in that app. And
I will say that Launch Center Pro, I believe, is the only third-party app that has ever made it into my dock.
Yes.
Yeah, because it just replaces so many things. It's like a second. It's as much as Siri is the ultimate audio natural language interface. I think Launch Center is the ultimate gesture launch interface for the iPhone.
Thanks, man. As an iPhone developer, it's when somebody says they put my app on their home screen and you think about like wanting to be a home screen app, like having enough depth and functionality to be on the home screen, is a really incredible thing. And Justin and I both have just been thrilled at the response we've gotten from Launch Center, and to think of all the people we really respect, like you, who put it in their dock. So we're pretty excited. We've got some cool stuff in store. So
you made my life easier, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can find me at Rene Ritchie on Twitter. You can find me at iMore.com. You can find all of us at iMore. You can email us at podcast@imore.com, or you can just leave a comment on the show when it goes live on the blog. For all of our shows, go to mobilenations.com/shows, and we will be doing a iMore Sunday edition, although we're looking for a better name. We're still looking for a better name for that show. This Sunday with Guy English, who has opinions about some things Apple related, which should be a good show.
Interesting.
Yeah. Everyone, thank you very much. We have the best looking, best spoken, best informed, generally best chat room in mobile. We love having you. And David, thank you very much.
Yeah, that's fun.
If not sooner, iPad event, if not sooner.
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Good night, everybody.